Welcome to Remedy and Rhyme, a space where poetry meets the wise power of plants. I'm your host, Kimberly Kling of Joyful Roots. We'll begin each episode with a poem, a soul offering inspired by a single herb. From there, we'll follow the thread of the plant's deeper wisdom, exploring what it reveals to the heart, how it invites us into greater awareness, and how we might welcome that into our own lives. Then we'll ground that insight with simple ways to work with the herb in your everyday life rhythms. So whether you're here for the poetry, the plant stories, or the space in between, I'm so grateful that you've joined me. This podcast is for educational and inspirational purposes only. I'm not a medical doctor or a licensed health professional, and nothing shared here is intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. The information provided has not been evaluated by the FDA. Herbs are powerful allies, but not without personality. If you experience an allergic reaction or discomfort from any herb mentioned, please stop using it. Also, if you're taking medications, check with your doctor about potential herb-drug interactions. Most importantly, you and you alone are the steward of your own body. What you choose to consume, apply, or integrate is entirely up to you. This is about health empowerment. Listen with curiosity and always honor your own body's wisdom. Hello and welcome to another episode of Remedy and Rhyme. Today we're going to be talking all about a favorite friend of mine, Mullein, whose Latin name is Verbascum thapsus. Although there are other species of mullein used as well, this one seems to be the most common in modern herbalism. Occasionally I'll go out to the garden and sit next to a plant with my journal or a pen and paper and just decide to connect with the plant and see what comes through. When I first sat with Mullein, I wasn't really expecting to receive a whole lot more than a gentle nudge, but as I listened, this poem came through, and it was almost like Mullein was speaking. Later, when I began researching Mullein a little bit more, and this was a few years ago, I was struck by how closely the words in the poem that came through aligned with what herbalists and storytellers have carried for centuries. It felt like a deep confirmation of Mullein's wisdom, a wisdom that's always been here, waiting to be remembered by me. So here's the poem that came through, and I'm excited to share this with you. Align your spine, align your mind, give it time. Spiral, spiral, spiral up, perfect patterns reflected in you. With the temple of your body straight, rise up like a kundalini snake. We show you how to anchor down. Massive growth requires ground. Go way, 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 way down into the dark depths, bringing to the surface all that's stuck. Rugged ribs holding the softest leaves. The medicine of opposites, strength and gentleness, guiding you to catch your breath, to ease the airways, to stop the cough. But don't leave it at that. We hold stories for humans, centuries standing as watchtowers. Drip the beeswax down and we will light your way through the dark passages of time. Just remember to spread our seeds. There's something about standing in the presence of a mullein plant that feels like being in the company of an old guide. Mullein is tall, steady, soft, and unshakably rooted. Mullein teaches us what it means to hold ourselves in alignment. You might first notice the way it rises above the grasses and wildflowers, sometimes 6, 7, even 8 feet tall, with its flowering stalk like a candle lit up by the sun. There's no rush in its growth. Mullein waits, gathering strength in its first year, sending energy deep into the earth before it ever dares to reach toward the sky. There's a lesson there. Before we rise, we root. Mullein's towering stalks reach upward, but its soft, velvety leaves stay close to the ground, hugging the earth in a basal rosette fashion. Mullein whispers, massive growth requires ground. When we spend so much of our lives stretching, striving, and chasing the next thing, we forget the importance of grounding, the kind that nourishes us beneath the surface, unseen but essential. Not all that is important is visible to the eye. Sometimes it's our roots and our inner world that grow beneath the surface to allow our outer, visible aspects to shine. Mullein holds a duality. It's soft yet strong, tender yet resilient. Touch its leaves and you'll feel the gentlest down, like a secret offering meant only for those who come close enough. But watch it stand against the wind and you'll see a plant that doesn't bend easily. Mullein reminds us that softness is not weakness. In fact, sometimes it's softness that allows us to hold our shape without breaking. Mullein's stalks reveal another layer of wisdom too. For centuries, its tall, dried stalks were dipped in beeswax or tallow or some sort of fat and used as torches to light the way through darkness. There's something about that image, Mullein standing tall, steady, and luminous, that speaks to our own journeys. It reminds us that even when we feel the path is uncertain, we carry a light within us, a spark that can guide us forward. Sometimes courage isn't about charging ahead, it's about holding that inner torch, steady and patient until the way becomes clear. Mullein teaches us that alignment, body, mind, spirit, and soul, creates its own kind of courage. The courage to soften, the courage to root more deeply, and the courage to trust our own unfolding. Actually, there's a lot of courage around where mullein likes to grow. It makes its home on land that's been disturbed or experienced trauma. An ecosystem builder of sorts, showing us yet again how it's offering healing to the cracks and crevices of the world. Mullein mends the land by spreading its plethora of seeds and stabilizing the ground through its roots so that other plants can also take root. It also offers healing by pulling heavy metals and toxins from the land to make the soil renewed again. In fact, while digging into this a little bit deeper, I actually found out that mullein not only can pull heavy metals and toxins from the ground, it's actually transforming them and making them less toxic. As far as I'm understanding, mullein roots actually release various organic compounds into the soil, known as root exudates, and these compounds can include sugar, amino acids, and organic acids, which serve as food for soil microorganisms. And by enhancing these microbial populations, mullein indirectly boosts the biodegradation process. These microorganisms can then produce specific enzymes that help with the biodegradation of toxic chemicals and pollutants, like pesticides, hydrocarbons, and industrial chemicals. They can be transformed into simpler, less harmful substances, which I find to be extremely fascinating and amazing. So many of mullein's most prominent gifts are gifts for both the body and the spirit. They seem to be about bringing us back into greater alignment by softening what has become rigid and releasing what's been stuck, and also getting rid of what's unwanted, whether that's in the body or the mind. This relates to alignment, not just of the spine, but of the whole self. We're learning to stand tall without forcing it, to breathe fully into who we are without apology, and to root deeply enough that our upward growth comes naturally, without strain. Just like that, there's an ease to mullein's presence, a quiet strength that doesn't demand attention, but holds it at the same time. The base of the mullein plant is a beautiful spiral of leaves, hidden beneath the flowering crown, winding upward in perfect patterns. Mullein's leaf arrangements follow the Fibonacci sequence. The leaves are arranged in a spiral pattern, which minimizes shading on the lower leaves. The Fibonacci spiral in plants like mullein reflects an efficient growth pattern, a brilliance of nature that helps plants optimize light exposure and space utilization, contributing to greater survival. Our eyes and minds are naturally attuned to find beauty in this sequence as well. Like mullein, we are meant to spiral in our growth. Alignment, like healing, isn't linear. It's cyclical and spiralic. It's the soft returning to ourselves over and over again, each time a little bit deeper and a little bit clearer. Mullein invites us to trust this spiral, to allow growth to unfold at its own pace, and to let more light in through the process. When we slow down enough to listen, we can hear the invitation from mullein. Stand tall, root deep, breathe spaciously, align your spine, align your mind. Remember that you too can be many things at once: grounded and expansive, delicate and enduring, soft and strong. Mullein offers an invitation to ground so deeply into who you are that reaching upward becomes effortless. I'd like to tell you a story of Hecate's torch. Long ago, when the gods and humans still shared the same earth, there was a goddess who walked the in-between spaces. Hecate, keeper of thresholds, crossroads, and hidden ways. She belonged to the liminal places, where light meets shadow, where endings fold into beginnings, where the path forward isn't clear yet. Hecate was always depicted holding two torches, symbols of illumination in darkness, of finding one's way when the road disappears beneath your feet. Some say these torches weren't made from ordinary wood at all, but from plants like mullein, tall, straight, steady stalks dipped in beeswax to create a lasting flame. I like to imagine her walking through the wild edges of the earth, holding mullein torches alight, guiding those who found themselves lost in grief or confusion, or maybe through the transformation process. She was never a goddess who removed the darkness entirely. Instead, she offered just enough light to take the next step. That, to me, feels like Mullein's gift. Mullein thrives in disturbed places, roadsides, abandoned lots, forgotten fields. It shows up where the earth has been unsettled, where something has broken open. And there Mullein stands, tall, luminous, and a golden torch against the backdrop of uncertainty, and perhaps the possibility of fresh beginnings. Just like Hecate's torches, Mullein reminds us that courage doesn't come from banishing the dark. It comes from softening into it, trusting that the path will reveal itself as we move forward. It teaches us that alignment isn't about perfect clarity. It's about keeping your channel open, your spine straight, and your heart lifted so that you can hold your own light and walk on. And maybe that's why mullein has always been a plant of both protection and guidance. Across centuries and cultures, people carried its dried stalks into ritual and battle, lit them in sacred spaces, and placed mullein's leaves near doorways to guard against harm. It's a reminder that we are held, even when life feels uncertain, that there's an ancient wisdom waiting at the edges of the path. In addition to being a plant of quiet courage and alignment, mullein is a powerful physical ally. Its soft, velvety leaves have traditionally been used to support the lungs and breath, helping us move through times when life feels constricted or heavy. Herbalists have long noted how its leaves can be brewed into infusions or oils to invite spaciousness, ease tension, and bring comfort to the chest and the throat. Mullein leaf tea is a favorite in my home, and we call on mullein leaf tea often when we need to improve our breathing, whether that's from a cold or some sort of respiratory condition that we've recently experienced. Mullein has a way of making breathing more expansive and comfortable in the body. It can help to soften and bring up stuck mucus and moisten the airways. Being that we live in a dry climate, I find mullein an exceptional remedy and plant ally for any sort of dry respiratory condition. Mullein is specifically indicated for respiratory conditions where there's dry, irritable cough, and perhaps the lymphatic system is also kind of swollen and congested due to this dryness. Mullein has a lovely mucilaginous quality. It's not extremely mucilaginous, but enough to moisten, and it helps to reduce inflammation as well. So it can be beautiful for conditions where there's inflammation in the trachea or the bronchioles or lungs, and especially in conditions where the mucus is stuck because of dryness. This helps to get things moving, to moisten things up a bit and get the mucus out. There's also some antimicrobial action, which can help for respiratory tract infections, and also an astringent quality, which can help tone up those mucous membranes. If you look at a mullein leaf, it has all of these fuzzy little hairs all over it, and they kind of remind me of the cilia that line respiratory airways. I know that other herbalists have observed the same thing, and in fact, Seja Popham of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism writes that he believes that the mullein can help to repair the cilia, and over time this will help to repair the respiratory tract and keep those tissues healthier and help them to better stop infection from invading the delicate respiratory tissue and sinking deeper into the lung. It does seem like mullein has a bit more of an affinity for the lower respiratory tract than the upper one, so keep that in mind. In instances where chronic respiratory conditions have led to weak lungs, mullein can be an extremely supportive ally because it has that astringent and emulsant quality at the same time, which makes it toning to the respiratory tissues, but also really soothing and inflammation reducing. Mullein is a pretty mild remedy, which means that it is often used with children. However, you should always do your own due diligence to make sure something is right for you before you work with it. This is a remedy that's not really overly warming or overly cooling or overly moistening or overly drying. However, if you tend towards a kapha constitution where you have a little bit more dampness, you might want to just keep an eye on things because mullein can promote fluid secretion, so you don't want to make any sort of dampness worse. That being said, I don't really know of any herb-drug interactions or major contraindications, but again, check with your healthcare team and do your due diligence if you would like to work with mullein. To make some mullein leaf tea, you would pour about a cup of boiling water or recently boiled water over 1 tablespoon of leaf, and then you would want to cover that and let it infuse for about 15 minutes. After it has infused, I like to strain the mullein out through a fine tea towel or fine cheesecloth to make sure that none of those little hairs get into my tea, because those can be slightly irritating and that's counterproductive to what you probably want to be accomplishing. Another way that I love working with mullein is via the flowers, and I think sometimes this is like a little bit of an underrated remedy, but the flowers have their own special power that's a bit unique from the leaves. I have quite a few mullein plants growing around our yard, and I've been recently actually for the past couple of months going out every few days and just collecting all of the little flowers that have fallen off the stalk and are resting on the mullein leaves. They seem like a little treat that's kind of laid out there for you. So I go and collect those, and then sometimes I'll also pick a few from the actual stalk, taking care to leave some for the insects and other creatures that might be utilizing those flowers. And then I bring them inside, and I have a special spot, a little tiny basket that I keep them in to dry. And in my climate, I can just lay them out and they dry on their own because we have such a dry climate anyway. You may have to use a dehydrator if you live in a really humid climate because you don't want them to dry and get moldy. However, I haven't found that to be an issue here. Once I have a couple handfuls of the flowers, I like to take a pint jar and make sure that it's clean, and you can put your dried flowers into the jar. I try to fill the jar up about a third of the way with the dried flowers, and then I simply pour organic olive oil over the flowers and fill the jar up the rest of the way with that olive oil. And then what I do is place that jar for about 5 days on top of our espresso machine, because half the day that espresso machine on the top of it has a nice warmth to it that helps to gently infuse the constituents from the flowers into the olive oil. You don't have to do that. Obviously, not everybody has access to an espresso machine that they can put oils on top of. However, you can let the flowers sit in your oil for about a month and shake that every few days, and eventually those constituents will get infused into that olive oil. Or you can figure out your own way to apply a gentle heat to your oil for a few days. You don't want to let that heat stay too long on the oil because it will make the oils turn rancid faster. But for a few days, it's really beneficial to help it infuse better. And then after it's infused sufficiently, you can strain out those flowers and compost them, and then you'll have this beautiful mullein flower infused olive oil. And how do you use that? Well, I have found that there's more uses than what it's most well known for, which is as an ear oil. Mullein flower infused olive oil is a beautiful oil for earaches, and it's got a long history of traditional use for this exact purpose. The mullein flower infused oil can help to break up hardened wax that may have lodged itself in the ear canal and open up the ear canal by helping to soften and remove that wax. It's often called upon for kids who have earaches, and part of how it helps is because it's antiseptic and has antibacterial properties, in addition to that softening of the wax. It also helps work because it has an influence on the nerves, and earaches typically have a nerve-associated type of pain. Another traditional recipe for making earache oil is to include mullein flowers and fresh garlic in the oil. Well, the leaves of the mullein plant are typically used for the lungs and respiratory conditions, and kidneys as well, which we haven't really talked about. But the flowers seem to be much better suited for the nerves, and I have found this to be true in my own personal experience. For this reason, the mullein flower infused oil can be used on other parts of the body as well. I personally have pretty bad TMJ, and my jaw starts to get really inflamed and painful, and I get nerve pain that shoots up behind my eye and down the back of my neck. And I have found that mullein flower infused oil helps to bring me a decent amount of relief, which is definitely much appreciated. Another unique characteristic of mullein that makes it extremely beneficial is that it has an ability to move fluids through the body. So it can support the movement of moisture to drier parts of the body, like maybe our bones, our ligaments, our joints, even cartilage. And it can actually help lubricate these areas of the body that might be experiencing a sharp or burning pain, and maybe even help with locations of old breaks where the bones were broken in the past. Because of this, the mullein flower infused oil that I talked about earlier can actually be really useful for other parts of the body as well, and that might be part of how it's helping my jaw. Herbalist Kiva Rose talks about how mullein can be indicated where there's a lot of pain in the hips, when it feels like your back is a corkscrew rather than an actual spine. And it might be especially painful at night when attempting to sleep. She speaks about using the tincture of either the flowers or the root before bed. However, someone experiencing pain like this might also want to try rubbing the flower infused oil on their back. One last thing I'd like to mention is I mentioned its action on the kidneys, and where mullein seems to really shine in the urinary tract is for people who have both lung and kidney weakness together. But this might also show up in a sort of urinary incontinence. So it's throughout the urinary tract. Maybe there's a loss of tone, and this is leading to a sort of leaking of the bladder or recurring bladder infections, or maybe even generalized pain that is associated with irritation and inflammation in general. Oh, and I know I said that was the last thing I wanted to mention, but there's more. I also wanted to mention that mullein can be helpful topically and internally to soften lymph nodes that have become hard or swollen glands and help sort of clear out some of the bogginess or stagnancy that might be occurring there. That's one of the ways it directly works with the respiratory system as well, since the respiratory system and the lymphatic system work so closely hand in hand. It seems like one of the overarching themes of mullein is, on a both physical and emotional level, that it softens the areas that have become hard. That really does harken back to what we were talking about earlier, where mullein reminds us that softness isn't weakness, and sometimes it's softness that allows us to hold our shape without breaking. I said that before, but I wanted to repeat it again because I think it's so profound. So as we wrap up this episode all about mullein, I'd love for us to reflect on a few questions. When you sit with mullein, you might also want to ask yourself, how am I tending to my roots in order to build strength for growth? Where am I standing at a crossroads? Where am I being invited to soften and realign? And where might I carry my own small torch forward, trusting that the next step will become clear? I would love to see more poems being submitted to Remedy and Rhyme so that I can share them on this podcast and make it a bit more of a community effort. I know there's some amazing poets out there. So if you have any poetry that you think might be aligned with this podcast, please send me an email at kim@joyfulroots.com, and in the title of the email you can tell me that it's a poetry submission for Remedy and Rhyme, and I'll be in touch. I am so excited to keep sharing the wisdom of plants and poetry with all of you. If you enjoy this journey and would like to help support this podcast, whether energetically, financially, or just by sharing it with a friend, I would be so grateful. Your support helps to keep this space alive, allows me to continue exploring new herbs, crafting new episodes, and sharing inspiration with you. One of the easiest ways to support this podcast is to rate and review it in your favorite podcast app. You can also join our Remedy and Rhyme Patreon page, which is available at patreon.com/joyfulroots. You'll find all sorts of goodies there, including plant stories, recipes, and more. There is a free membership, but if you are able to help support the podcast via any sort of monetary donation, that is super appreciated. This episode is also brought to you in part by my favorite matcha on the planet, Posana Matcha. It's certified organic, third-party tested to ensure that it's free of heavy metals. It's pure, safe, and absolutely delicious. I love indulging in this every day. It's a single origin matcha that's grown in the lush fields of Shizuoka, Japan. And honestly, it's the only matcha that I reach for anymore. So when you use my code JOYFULROOTS, that's JOYFULROOTS, at checkout on Posana's website, you'll get 10% off your order, and you'll be supporting this podcast through the small affiliate commission that I receive, which helps me to continue creating this empowering herbal content just for you. You can find the link in the show notes or head to posana.net, that's POSANA.net, and use the coupon code JOYFULROOTS at checkout for 10% off your order. I'd like to give thanks for the music in the intro and the outro that is called Bedtime After a Coffee by Ikun Baradine on Chosik. I'd like to give immense thanks to my family for supporting me in this herbal journey, and for all of my friends and community who have also been so supportive. I'd like to give a shout out to all of the other herbalists who have influenced me. There are really just too many to name, but I'm so appreciative. And of course, my deepest gratitude goes to our plant allies who have honestly taught me more than I could have ever imagined. I'll see you in the next episode.